as he was working with it, the program crashed. And as it crashed, he was recording and he got these sounds. And that became the signature sound of the Shield.
Wow.
And when we placed that stuttering sound in, Denis loved that. He sent that to visual effects, and then visual effects animated a stutter to the sound effect.
Hey, what's up? Welcome to Wassup Conversations, a podcast featuring icons of pop culture. I'm your host, Hamid Reza Nikufar, and in this episode, I have the honor of speaking with a two-time Oscar winner and six-time Oscar-nominated sound editor. From Mad Max Fury Road and Blade Runner 2049 to Dune, his work has shaped the sonic landscapes of some of cinema's most iconic films. My legendary guest is none other than Mark Mangini. In this episode, Mark and I delve into the topics like success, failure, and creativity. We also explore Mark's ingenious approach to crafting immersive and unique worlds through sound. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Wassup Conversations on YouTube and all the major podcast streaming services if you're enjoying this podcast. Thank you so much. Let's go. Hello and welcome to Wassup Conversations, Mr. Mangini. It's an absolute honor to talk to you since you're one of my biggest inspirations for becoming a sound designer. And this is crazy because I was looking at your IMDb page and the first project is dated back to 1976. So I did the math and it's been 48 years ago, if I'm correct. I turned 33 this month, so your experience as a professional in this work is longer than I ever existed. So sorry,
I'm embarrassed. That's terrible.
No, so thinking about it, I was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So really thank you for doing this.
I'm happy to be here. I love talking about sound because sound is everything that I do. Sound is as big a part of my life as my family. And, you know, everything is intertwined somehow with me. Is work and love, life, it all fits together somehow.
And I'm so excited to talk to you about sound, something we both love. So, you know, when you get the chance to talk to a true legend, one of the hardest things that I'm going to ask, what am I going to ask? What can I learn? And in this case, you've been so generous with your knowledge in all these years that I think anyone, professional or newcomer, can learn so much from you via your website, YouTube interviews, and lectures. So considering that I have so many questions that so few people on this planet answer, and I guess you're one of them. So let's ask some questions that are not usually asked in these kind of questions. So I think it's better to start with that your legendary career is full of great artwork, celebrated movies, and you're one of few people who has 2 Oscars and 6 Oscar nominations. When you look back at your life as an artist and as a human being, what do you see as a true satisfying success in life? And also, has winning like 2 Oscars changed you in a way? Does it add pressure to you or free you from the notion of trying to prove yourself?
Boy, those are 2 great questions. So we should divide them up so I can answer them equally. The first question, I'm sorry to repeat maybe I need another cup of coffee. The first question was,
so what is it when you look back at your life, is it a true satisfaction? Do you think that, I've done it?
I've done it. Well, yes, in that kind of tied to the second question, an early goal of mine when I was 19 years old, I dropped out of university studies because I realized what I loved to do was filmmaking. And I had been making films since I was a kid. My dad had given me his home movie camera, a film camera. This is a long time ago. And I made stop motion animations, and that was my love. And yet I went to university to study languages. And that was because as a young man graduating high school, I thought that's the path that everyone takes. You go on to university studies, you major in something, and you develop a career. And I didn't see back then that film was a career. I didn't even know how to pursue it. So I pursued the thing I did next best, which was speak languages. So I studied Spanish, Italian, and Russian in university, expecting to become a translator. I wanted to work for the UN. And it was in the middle of my second year of university studies that I realized that this was not my love. And this is something my dad taught all of us kids. I'm one of 6 children. And that was, if you want happiness in life, pursue something you love as a career, and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. And he has been certainly correct in my life. So I came to Los Angeles having been inspired by watching the Oscars on television. In 1976, I saw the Oscars on TV, as we did as a family every year in March or February back then. And I remember kind of the light bulb going off and thinking, oh my God, that's what I want to do. Like filmmaking, yes, that's a career. You can earn a living and you can have fun doing it. And maybe someday you'll win an Oscar. And so that gets us to your question a little bit. I have found deep satisfaction in being recognized by my peers for the work that I do. And that satisfaction, I think, is rare. And I recognize, and I'm humbled by it, that others in the world appreciate my work. Nonetheless, the bigger message, to answer the first question, is I am one of the very lucky human beings in the world that loves what I do. And I think that's hard for many people to say in our lives, that maybe go to a boring office job every day and they come home, they're looking forward to coming home at the end of the workday to do something great with their family, but their job is more tedious, or it's work. It's not that for me. I as much look forward to going into the studio every day as other people do when they engage in their hobbies or other things that they love. And so I feel fortunate and grateful to have found something that I love that I can earn a living doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. That means that the goal, although those Oscars were like, one day maybe I get one, and you got 2, but
I still can't believe it.
Yeah, yeah. I think the goal wasn't always that, and as you've answered correctly, the fact that you're every day in the studio doing what you love is something, because there are always these stories, the people like reaching Mount Everest and suddenly feeling satisfaction and then saying, oh, this is the worst moment of my life, and what's next then? This is the top of the hill. But you've done it twice and still you have a smile and you're enjoying this. So it means it's the work that is must be appreciated, not and be as a goal, not any awards. And it's great that you are appreciated.
Yeah. And you can always kind of smell it when the goal for some people is the award. You shouldn't do anything for the prize at the end. The reward is the journey. And the journey has been extraordinarily interesting and crazy and unexpected for me. And I could tell you stories of 48 years of discovery and failure and success and meeting people and sharing and collaboration. All of that is what has given me meaning. And the award is kind of anticlimactic. I mean, I will say, having wanted to win an Oscar is one of my many life goals. First life goal, find something you love to do and pursue it and enjoy it every day. That's life goal number 1. But along the way, maybe you could win an Oscar, and that would be really fun too. And so that was a sublime moment. I cried when I won an Oscar because I realized I had achieved a major life goal, something we all, this is common to all human beings. We have a goal in life, whether it's to climb Mount Everest or, whatever the objective is. And I achieved that. And in that moment, I realized, again, I'm one of the luckiest human beings in the world, because not everyone achieves their goals. And I should never stop one from trying. but I got to. And so I felt humble and grateful. And I think gratitude is an immensely important sense to develop in ourselves, to be grateful for what we have in the moment that we have it, and not feel like our lives aren't fulfilled because we don't have what we don't have.
Exactly.
So,
And there's this beautiful life lesson behind this that although you've won two, but you have been nominated for a few others, but you haven't won. So you weren't kind of crushed down by that. Although being nominated for Oscar is, is the ultimate
well,
win.
I am not looking for sympathy of any kind, but I'm going to tell a sad story.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, before I won my first Oscar, it's very painful going through the process of being nominated. Of course, it's an honor, and one gets all this attention, and you get to speak to the press and go on television. But in that moment, you're in the theater, and you're waiting for them to open that envelope and read the name. That pressure is immense. And of course, you have to deal with the disappointment. And oh, poor Mark. Oh, poor Mark. He didn't win an Oscar, but he was nominated. But that has its own sets of pressures and, anticipation and disappointment. But I will tell you this. I'll tell you something else really interesting. And again, poor Mark. This is like Mark playing his tiny violin. While having won Oscars is deeply gratifying, it in a way, it's this odd impediment to my future success. One would think that would propel my success, but oddly, when I meet new filmmakers, they know about the awards and the accomplishments, and what happens is they give me too much deference. Do you know this word deference?
Yeah.
Meaning, because it's Mark Mangini and he's won these awards, I don't get as much pushback as I used to. And I think the great relationships, the great soundtracks in the world come from you and the filmmaker pushing and pulling, like, hey, I have an idea. No, I have a better idea. And what if we do this in the middle? And it's that tug of war that makes great art in cinema, because cinema is a collaborative medium. And because I have won awards, I'm getting less of this from the filmmaker, because they're thinking, well, if Mark has this idea, it must be a good one. I'm not going to push back on it. And I think that, and so I am very vocal about ensuring that we maintain that relationship of challenging each other about what's best for our film. And having won these awards is coloring the conversation, because people think, well, he's won an award. Maybe he. And you know what? I know that I'll out of 10 ideas that I have, only 5 of them are good. They're not all good.
Yeah.
But part of the artistic process is offering the ideas and discovering which are the good ones. So you need to have that conversation.
Yeah. So the internal struggle of an artist is a never-ending battle of a doubt and ego. Sometimes we unfortunately compare our work to work, or even worse, ourselves to others. And that, I guess, is a dangerous way of thinking professionally and personally. There's this
very much so.
Golden quote of yours that I heard in an interview that really spoke to me. You once said, "If you steal from me, all you do is steal from yourself, because what you have stolen from yourself is an original idea." Now,
exactly right.
That original idea, I guess, is the key to all of this. It's the key to enjoy your work, to be good at your work. And ultimately, by the end of the day, you feel good about yourself. So please expand on that. How do you avoid comparison and focus on original ideas that come straight out of your mind and heart?
Boy, that's a whole 1-hour podcast all by itself. That idea of being true to yourself.
Yeah.
And very often in interviews, a question I hear often is, what advice would you give young sound designers or any artist? And it's always the same.
Yeah.
Be true to yourself. It's a trope. It's cliche, but it is true. And it took me a long time to realize that. I studied the greats as a young sound designer, and went down that path that many do. I wanted to be the next Ben Burt or the next Alan Splett. And I studied their work assiduously. And the problem with that is, as I did that, though there was educational value in learning their techniques, I discovered that it came at the expense of my own ideas. While I was trying to sound like Ben Burt, I was not sounding like Mark Mangini. And I wouldn't learn till 10, 15 years later that my success would come from offering my original ideas and the joy that comes from having a filmmaker respond to my idea, not my imitation of somebody else's ideas. And that continues to be true to this day. So it's I know it's cliche advice, but what the consequences of this are really important. The first is you can't learn to, you can, in the process of developing who you are as an artist, you make mistakes because you have to risk and you have to risk rejection. You have to here's my sound. Here's what I think your movie should sound like. And the filmmaker may say, no, that doesn't work. If you don't go through that process, you don't learn. You only learn and grow through doing and failing. And the beauty of failure is that it teaches you about the future. It's a future where you won't make that mistake again because you've already learned by doing it the wrong way. The other consequence that's really vital is that as you fail in this process of growth, you develop a coterie of filmmakers that you belong with. And if there are filmmakers that you fail with, those are probably filmmakers that you don't belong with. What you want to develop is a camaraderie with filmmakers who think like you do. And you only learn that through experimentation and failure and success. And so all of that failure is propelling you towards future success. Now, I'm using that word failure a lot because it's so vital in the growth process. The Buddhists have a saying, when you lose, don't lose the lesson, which is all that I'm talking about, which is use that failure as a way to learn and grow. And I call it scars. At 48 years into my career, when I'm offered a challenge in my work, I look at the scars as if they were literal scars on my body. Oh, I remember that scar when I had that stupid idea about that creature voice. Oh, there's another scar when I had that really dumb idea to take that music cue out. All of them live on my body as reminders that guide me to a very delicate path of success. And the path to success can be very delicate and nuanced, all guided through experience. And experience, there's no shortcut. There's only doing it.
Exactly. As you said, Rumi, the Persian poet, said the scars you have are the windows to light. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's as similar as the Buddhists. Oh, I love Rumi. I'm going to use that. Thank you for that reference.
Yeah, exactly.
Good one.
And exactly, this is great. So Da Vinci once said, art is never finished, only abandoned. But Da Vinci was mixing something when he said that. God damn it, this mix is never ending. So, but it's a very true idea. There's always room for improvement, and the work might be perfect to the ears of others, but the artist knows the true potential or even the holes of that piece of work. How do you stop cringing or beating yourself over something that you feel has more potential especially with your long career? I guess that's even more profound. Like in the middle of a night, you think about a sound you've done in the 80s and that could have been way better. Is it going to haunt you? So this doubt that it could be better.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, I was just reading about this. Where was it? I don't remember the journalist, but it's a profound question about perfection and our pursuit of perfection. And the only really satisfying answer I have is that if one knows that one has given 100% of an effort to the work at hand, it's the only way you can sleep at night. You work in our industry. I know that we never have enough time, money, people, whatever. Filmmaking is notorious for constraints and restrictions that don't allow us, as in the way that perhaps singular artists such as painters or sculptors, that we have this sort of idealized version of artists alone in a studio with a canvas and a paintbrush, and they can take as long as they'd like because there are no outside pressures. They are their own master. We all wished we lived in that world, but we know we don't. And so all that can be done is to have made the most valiant effort that any one of us can make, given the amount of time and budget that we have. So that being said, a practical approach to solving this conundrum is looking at any project as a whole and identifying the most important beats, the most important moments, the most important designs, and ensuring that you address those as fully as you can to your own satisfaction. And then there's this subset of other things in your project that you wanted to get to, but you couldn't, but aren't as important as the major themes in every project that we have. And I feel like that's a success. If we can address the major beats, if we can address and solve the filmmaker's concerns, how can sound tell your story best, and where do we need it most? Well, here's those 5 scenes. Let's attack those first. And very often, that's the prescriptive for how to approach any project. Find the top level needs and make sure those are done. And when you do this, you can look back on 48 years of work and say, I did the best I could. I know I could have done better here, and here. And that's all I'm human. I'm simply human. This is the best I can do.
Exactly. And as you've mentioned, there's this give or take here, but it's important that as much as we have given to this project, to this film or whatever, we take something back, and that's experience, even if we are losing something. Exactly as you mentioned something like this. I recently was making music for this video, and I started something different, a new approach, something exactly like you said. I was like, all right, I have a beautiful, amazing idea for this moment and this moment. Let's start making it's like 5 minutes into in this scene, and there's this 8 minutes into the scene. Let's just make music for those, and then just occupy the spaces between. And by the end of it, I was like, I got it. I have my idea there, and it's just, but instead of just going linear. And that experience was the best. I'm approaching every project like this now. It's just like pinpointing what's great and what's I'm good at here. I'm gonna do that first, and then the rest is inspired by that great thing, great thought.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
well, that's a great actual observation, because when you've achieved something wonderful that inspires you, that colors everything else you're going to do after that. There's this sort of feeling of success, and you feel the rush of endorphins and whatever's happening in your body system to make you feel good. And it is through that happiness and sense of well-being that other good work comes.
You want to repeat it. Yeah. So I'm not going to explain what a huge fan of Blade Runner and Dune I am. What's great about these projects, both but led by Denis Villeneuve, is that they both create unique worlds that are rooted in our world, considering that it's only natural to make every part of this world simultaneously, something which is unfortunately rare in film productions. But for both projects, you were involved from the beginning. Please tell me how the process works this way, and as much as it is freeing, is it also frustrating since you're not seeing the almost finished film? So there are a lot of gray area. Like, I'm not sure how this is gonna end up when the VFX comes, when you shoot it.
Well, to answer the second question first, it has never been frustrating. It's only a privilege to be able to work in this progressive manner. As you probably know, the work that we do is taught in film school as post-production. It's called post-production because it's after production. And that's a very last century way of looking at filmmaking. It's an old school way of looking at filmmaking, that sound is applied to a film like a veneer. It's a paint job on a really beautiful automobile. It's as if Ferrari did all the designing of a beautiful engine and suspension and transmission, and you're just the guy that paints it and had nothing to do with the way it functions. Denis Villeneuve, among others, like George Miller and Joe Dante and Gavin O'Connor and others, are very progressive filmmakers who realize that sound is an integral process of filmmaking that can and should be incorporated from the very beginning. Why should a writer, when developing a screenplay, not consider sound as a valuable narrative tool? Because sometimes, not all the time, a sound can say something so much more efficiently than a body of words. A sound can evoke a place or a mood or a feeling about a character that it takes a lot of exposition sometimes to set up. And these progressive filmmakers recognize the value of that. So I see it as this amazing opportunity to be part of the creative birthing of a project. On films like Blade Runner and Dune, my design partner, Theo Green, and I were brought on during pre-production to comment on the script and offer suggestions where sound is part of the storytelling. And during production, as the editor is building the edit, as Denis is shooting, we are developing sounds that are affecting the edit. And that becomes a very unique and beautiful collaboration of a rough edit is assembled after a day's shooting. You've shot scene 73. The editor completes a rough version of it, but he knows sound needs to be added. Sound is added in the process of adding sound to a rough edit, the editor discovers where the deficiencies are in the scene. Once sound is applied, they realize, oh, this scene feels a little long now. Sound didn't add enough, so I need to shorten or maybe lengthen. All of the collaborative processes informing the film as a whole. But even more vital is the effect that sound can have on visual effects during production, because visual effects, they're shooting plates and they're developing storyboards and ideas of what the visual effects will look like. But the visual effects artists maybe don't have as refined an idea of what a shot should look like as we do that a shot should sound like. So sometimes we develop a sound first, and that informs the way the visual effect will work, versus the traditional approach, which is visual effects does their work and we wait 9 months later, we're in post-production, the shot finally shows up and we react to the shot rather than being proactive. Instead of being reactive, we are proactive by indicating what the visual effect might look like because of the way we want it to sound like. And that gives us the initiative as artists to develop from whole cloth, to build something that's never been heard before, and then let everyone else think about the why of it. Is it the right sound? And if it's the right sound, maybe now that changes the duration of the edit, it changes the design and the look of the visual effects. And all of this starts to become this beautifully interwoven symbiotic process that is exactly what filmmaking should be. All the arts, all the sciences working together seamlessly and constantly to develop a whole. I mean, can you imagine going to the set and the cinematographer not having an interactive and collaborative conversation with the costumer, the production designer? You know, I go on and on. That is a very collaborative process. For some reason, post-production has been left out of that conversation. So smart and progressive filmmakers are learning that sound should be part of the entire conversation, not just the post-production conversation, because of what it can add to the filmmaking.
Exactly, and it's only natural because, and some people might say, oh, yeah, we don't have enough budget or time for this, but it's not really that time consuming or, I mean, something that comes to my mind is this scene from No Country for Old Men. There's this, I read the script in the movie when Antoine Chigurh, by Javier Bardem, is in this shop talking with the guy. There's this cover of chocolate on the table, and the camera just cuts in there, and the chocolate is just stretching out, and it's adding so much tension to the scene. And I was like, man, this is so specific about sound. And I read the script, and it was there in the script and explaining the way the sound works in this scene. And luckily, the Coen brothers are geniuses imagining sound, but bring on the sound designer, anyone responsible for that, and show the script and say, hey, this scene is about this guy, and it's intimidating. What idea do you have that could work sound-wise? Guys, there's this quote from George Lucas that's saying 50% is of the movie is audio, 50% of picture, which is natural, yeah. So it's just one sitting. I have an idea. Maybe a wind is cracking through a window. Oh, let's add a window there. Maybe there's this air conditioner working badly, and let's add that in the scene. And it just takes like half a day. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a good example of that. On Dune, one of our first sound design challenges was, what is the sound of the shields? Frank Herbert writes very eloquently and scientifically about how the shields work, how they protect the individual who's deploying them. And we knew early on that we didn't want the shields to sound like shield sound in all other science fiction films. Usually, if you're in a Star Trek film, if you're protected by some shield, you hear some, like some buzzing, humming, to imply that there's energy around.
The element, yeah.
So concept number one led us to the solution for sound. And in this case, sound drove the visual effects. We thought to ourselves, well, we don't want to, in that scene, we don't want to hear this humming throughout the entire scene. And visual effects didn't want to build, some kind of transparent cocoon around the occupants. So we surmised that the solution was that the shield should only be heard and seen when it needs to deploy. So if the sword is about to strike from the attacker,
I remember.
That's when the shield knows when it gets close enough, the shield deploys and it pops on and shows itself to impede the movement of the sword or the object. And so that is how Theo and I began to develop those first sounds as watch the action as the sword approached Paul Atreides. The minute it got close to his head, we put in this stuttering electronic sound. And then it would go away as soon as the sword were retracted or repelled. And that gave and interestingly, the sound itself was an accident that happened while Theo was designing those sounds. He had taken Omnisphere 2 and plugged in the granular synthesis tool, plugged in a machine gun. And out of it, and as he was working with it, the program crashed. And as it crashed, he was recording and he got these sounds. And that became the signature sound of the shield.
Wow.
And when we placed that stuttering sound in, Denis loved that. He sent that to visual effects, and then visual effects animated a stutter to the sound effect. And that begat a collaborative back and forth of 12 different iterations of the sound and the visual effects. They would then develop the stuttering look, and we'd get that shot back, and then we'd add some sweetening component that made it sound more electronic or more sparky. And 12 iterations later, we have what's in the film. But the point being is that we developed a logic that was befitting of the technology, did not follow any science fiction tradition, and allowed sound to be an integral, collaborative part of the development of the look and feel of the scene.
Yeah, and it's so even more impactful when it's just appearing when it's about to attack, and it's a great example. Yeah, so for both of these projects, and on Dune, you've worked with Hans Zimmer, and I'm a sound designer and also composer for a video game at the moment, and it's almost difficult for me to think of sound and music separately. So, however, this is much easier for me since I'm taking care of both. But working on Dune, for example, which is very musical and very focused on sound, how do you communicate with Hans to make sure the experience is impactful as possible? And because it's really obvious when there's no communication, which ends up with sounds always clashing and sacrifices in sound and music. But Blade Runner 2049 and Dune are in perfect harmony.
Yeah. Well, it begins, of course, with the director. And if it does, like Denis Villeneuve, who recognizes that there's one soundtrack and there's all these components vying for attention. There's the dialogue, the sound effects, and the music, the basic food groups of any cinema soundtrack. And he recognizes that it's his responsibility as a director to direct that
communication.
That communication and the way that all of those elements interact. It's odd to me that, again, something not taught in film school, that the composer, director, the editor, and the sound designer should all begin working collaboratively from the very beginning of the film. Denis is prescient enough to bring on Hans and Ben Wallfish. Ben wrote most of Blade Runner 2049. And he's smart enough to bring on the composer to start developing sketches. And he's smart enough to bring on myself and Theo Green to begin developing the sound design. And in that process, we are communicating and collaborating and discovering where we all best function through a process of trial and error. Now, Denis is a brilliant filmmaker. He pretty much understands where music needs to predominate, where sound should predominate, and why that isn't taught in film school, because what you get instead is a final mix where no one has spoken, no one has collaborated, and you have this train wreck of this collision of too much dialogue, too much sound effects, too much music. How do I find my way out of this mess? And that's the final mix is not the time to do that. Denis has this lovely expression that's an outgrowth of his philosophy of having sound and music collaborate and work together, that where he says, when I get to the final mix, I want the sound and the music to be my old friends, meaning he's been listening to them for months during the shoot and the edit. And by the time he gets to the final mix, there's no surprises. He knows what the music is doing. He knows what the sound is doing. We've already talked about where they will segue and how they will interact and how they will blend together or not blend together, because we've made most of the critical decisions ahead of time. Why this is not happening in traditional filmmaking is somewhat of a mystery to me now, because it seems so self-evident. And yet, of course, we all work with filmmakers who aren't as progressive. And that then becomes a situation where you as the sound designer, we as the sound designers, and it is often we as the sound designers, should be the instigators of the communication. And we should speak with our filmmakers and say, I really think it'd be smart for us to sit down with the composer and have a conversation about how this is all going to work. And that could include things like, in this scene, I wanted to do something very tonal or moody, and that may interfere with what the composer's doing, either in pitch or tempo. And maybe if I share what I'm doing, or he or she shares what they are doing, we can find some beautiful way to blend or decide this should be carried by music or this should be carried by sound design, one or the other, but at least instigate the conversation. And that's not taught in film school and should be.
Exactly. And the result is very a clean mix, and everything shines. So let's talk about Mad Max Fury Road. I've watched this movie 49 times. It's the ultimate cinema class. I've learned so much about editing, sound, music, and writing, everything. Last month, I was on a flight to Paris, and on the seat next to me, there was someone watching Fury Road. And after 15 minutes, I realized I'm mesmerized by it, and I'm watching it without sound on this monitor. So I started the movie on my screen and watched it without headphones. The experience was amazing and of course, educational. So I promised on my flight back, I'm going to watch it again on the same screen, but with headphones on. This experiment was a huge lesson for me. The feel and the rhythm of the movie changed drastically. The cuts and flow of the movie were badass. And I felt the sound is sometimes cutting when the picture is not. And some other times it's gluing when the picture is cutting. So please tell me about your relationship with editing part of that film. And if you've ever been had collaboration with Margaret Sixel, the legendary editor of that film.
Right. Margie is an extraordinary filmmaker and the partner of George Miller.
And it was his first experience, right?
No, it's interesting. Margie is just such a brilliant film cineast. Margie was the assistant editor on Babe, Pig in the City, the first Babe movie that George Miller made. And that film was struggling to find an audience. And they brought in other editors, and they couldn't find the secret to unlock what George knew was a brilliant movie. And it was Margie who had the idea to introduce this storybook idea, to rethink the way it's presented, the format which is sort of a completely restructuring of the entire idea. It's still the same story about the pig, but to present it as in the wrapper of being told as a story from a narrator. And so Margie is a big part of the success of Mad Max Fury Road, because she and George have a philosophy that they imparted to me as well, that every frame, every shot, in Mad Max, there's approximately 2,500 edits, 2,500 shots. And in every shot of the film, we should have visual focus and we should have sonic focus. And that's the way we thought on Mad Max as we developed the sound. In fact, George drew out what he called the pyramid of importance. He drew a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is one thing, not three things, not five things, one thing that is our focus. In his, beat book, that could be the story point he's trying to tell. And for Margie as the editor, it's what did we want the audience to see that tells that story for that moment. And so because of that, they would shoot full frame sensor with digital cameras. And Margie would tell me that every shot in Mad Max was repoed, meaning repositioned, so that in spite of what was captured on location as
it's always
the framing,
at the center.
Well, not necessarily. It depended on what they wanted the audience to see. They would maneuver the focus of the audience to some part of the frame because that's where they wanted their focus to be. And that is what would then drive the sound. If that was the visual focus, we knew intuitively that there should only be one sound dominating the soundtrack. And then maybe just below that, there's two subservient sounds, and then everything else doesn't matter. And that is the way we created we allowed sound to tell stories. There's always a sound that is telling you the story for every one of those 2,500 shots.
Yeah. And there's this video of you talking about Mad Max, and God damn it. There's this scene that this car chase, and the jump cut happens, and you add an engine throttle to the jump cut, and it's like, and it makes no sense by any logic, and it's just Mark Mangini saying, "Hey kids, this is what power is." It's fucking great, man.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that clip has received a lot of views, but it's gotten a lot of negative, thumbs down, because car people are saying, no, that couldn't happen, and that took me out of the movie because cars can't do that, or they can do that, and none of that is the point. The point was to make that an exciting action beat in a movie, which is make-believe, and I'm glad you like that. That's just great filmmaking.
Yeah, that's what makes you different from others, sir. So, that's really something that's like, from now on, I'm going to say, hey, just consider the way it's edited and the way I'm going to add sound to it.
That's a really important point, though, because I'm often asked, how do you find your inspiration? And one of the ways to find inspiration is movement. I look for movement in the frame, and I look to other disciplines for inspiration to give me inspiration. So I look to, I know a little bit about cinematography. I studied cinematography in adult education classes because I wanted to learn how cinematographers communicate story with their tools. How do they use light and shadow and depth of field and framing and hundreds of other tools at their disposal to tell story. And so when I saw that push in or whip pan, I can't remember what it was, I thought, that looks like what I think an engine rev sounds like. And they seem to be just a natural fit. So sometimes we can be inspired by movement, not just the diegetic version of, well, I see a car on screen, I should hear a car. I see a gun, I should hear a gun. I'm looking for a color can inspire me to add a sound that you wouldn't think to add because the color evokes a mood. So I'm always looking for these clues from the costumer, the production designer, the cinematographer to help me use my tools to tell their story.
Yeah, that's great. Kudos to Junkie XL for that amazing thing that sounds like an engine. It's perfect blend.
John Seal is one of the greats of all time.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about your favorites, sir. What are some of your favorite films of all time?
Oh boy, there are hundreds. My favorite, I have two, both from a similar era. I love Forbidden Planet from 1956, and I love War of the Worlds.
The original one.
The original from 1956. For two slightly different reasons. I love Forbidden Planet because it was the first time I had ever seen or experienced a completely cohesive soundtrack that was the genius of two sound artists / musicians. Bibi and Louis Barron were well-known avant-garde composers in the 50s, and they were doing experimental music with synthesizers. They were some of the first adopters of electronica, and they were developing what would turn into what we know as synthesizers, electronic circuits that can generate sound and tones and notes. And they hand-built a series of amplifiers and tone generators that would become their instruments for the score. And yet the score was so much more than the score, because the score incorporated the sound effects. The score, or the instruments, these electronic instruments they developed, created the sounds of the id monster and the force fields and the weapons and the flying saucers. And all of this was all part of one seamless, integrated soundtrack, which is, I think, the earliest example of true sound design, because everything came from one or two in this case, but working together, two artists with a simple vision for the entire sound of the film. And it's a brilliant piece of work in the way that works. And it's, I think arguably one of the great soundtracks of all time, because it is so, I can hear 10 seconds of that film and I know it's Forbidden Planet. It's just an extraordinary accomplishment. And then War of the Worlds is a beautiful film because I love the cleverness that sound designer, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know who that was. I'm trying, it'll come to me in a minute. I loved the sounds that were developed. To me, those are as iconic. The sound of the scanner ray and the laser beams and the spaceships hovering are as iconic to me as Ben Burt sounds for the Star Wars films. They're innovative and use all just classic, sound design tools like recording acoustic sounds and then manipulating them after the fact. And I just love the sound of that film. It haunts me to this day when I see it.
Great. I gotta go. I've never watched the original film, so I'm gonna go watch it with this. So this next question is kind of like you answered it already. What are some of your favorite films regarding the sound?
Well, those are two of them.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say Star Wars because it is inarguably one of the great sound designed films of all time. It was so innovative in its day, and it evinced this idea that we've already been discovering of the importance of sound being part of the filmmaking process. George hired Ben Burt 3 years before the release of the movie to begin developing the sounds of the movie. And the sounds would then be being, filtered into the filmmaking and editing and visual effects design process. And George really meant what he said, and he shows it in the work that is in his film through what Ben achieved. You could hear 2 seconds of a Wookiee and you'd say, yeah, that's the Wookiee from Star Wars. That lightsaber sound, R2-D2. These are iconic sounds that I would argue are the only sounds I've ever heard people imitating when they leave a theater. That's the kind of social impact that the success of those sounds has had, that they're so iconic, they're so memorable that people imitate them with their voices.
Like it's
have you ever heard
it's a piece of music?
Like it's music, yeah.
Wow. Speaking of music, what are your favorite scores?
Probably there's many that are tied. I love the score to The Shawshank Redemption. Tom Newman is deeply haunting, and oh my God, I'm getting chills just thinking about those simple piano lines. And Star Wars, I love the thematic work that the great composers did in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where they developed melodic themes, the da 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 da. So John Williams is one of the great practitioners of thematic film score writing, and I love Star Wars, and I love Close Encounters of the First Kind. I mean, of the third kind.
Yeah.
And I love Schindler's List.
Wow, yeah.
With Itzhak Perlman's just haunting rendition of the Holocaust in one instrument. You can hear the pain and the grief of the Holocaust in those beautiful melodies and the way he performed them. Those scores haunt me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Those are some of my favorite. I will say, and I must say, this Vangelis's score to the first Blade Runner
Yeah.
to me
Wow.
is in a class by itself.
It's so iconic that it kind of changed the cyberpunk. He actually pioneered cyberpunk subgenre, but every now and then,
Mm.
even if the music is not imitating that score, you can hear it through the like a digital world. Like it's just the sound of the dystopian future. Exactly.
Well, let me tell you something about that. That's a beautiful observation. When we did Blade Runner 2049, we were given access to the masters, and I could listen to all of the materials that Vangelis
Wow.
presented to the filmmakers. And what very few people know is that Vangelis, much like BB and Louis Barron in Forbidden Planet, had also designed musical ambiences. And very often you're in a scene like Deckard's apartment, and you hear these pads and drones that
Yeah.
are, you know, they have some kind of musical tonal center, but there's no melody to them. And these are all experimental pieces that Vangelis had recorded and composed and handed off to the film editor, and the film editor edited in as if sound design. And that's why
Wow.
Blade Runner, the first Blade Runner, is so cohesive. It's this complete piece of work by Vangelis. There's the beautiful melodic and synthesizer work that he did, but there's also all these other drones and tones wafting in and out of scenes, crossing scene boundaries, non-diegetic sound that makes it feel like that's the sound of that universe.
Exactly.
And it's brilliant stuff.
It's perfectly
But no one knows that because no one's heard them. Those sounds have never
Yeah.
been published. And most credit those to the sound designer, but they were not done by the sound designer. They were done by Vangelis.
Yeah, and you always feel that you're living in the future because the essence of it is high tech, low life, and low life is the picture, and high tech is the sound, always surrounded by you by synthesizers. Yeah, that's genius. So, what is the last inspiring film you watched?
Last inspiring. Boy, I have to look at a list. I mean, nothing's
Yeah,
lately. I must say, I loved Oppenheimer.
yeah,
I loved Oppenheimer as a great film, and as a film that is, I think, important and thought provoking because of the ideas it presents of the moral conundrum that Oppenheimer himself as a man and as a scientist confronted, and the doubt he had after the fact of whether he had done the right thing. Did he do a disservice to the world? And I love it when films provoke a conversation. One of my favorite things to do is to always plan a dinner after seeing a movie so that myself and my wife or my friends can discuss what we just saw. And if a film is really good, it's because it provokes a conversation afterwards. If there's no conversation afterwards, it's probably not a very good
yeah,
movie.
exactly. Have you seen the film Beau's Afraid by Ari Aster?
I have not.
Yeah, that movie is a kind of small drama movie, but I love the sound work in that film. That's the word it creates. It was great. Yeah.
I just saw Point of Interest. You want to talk about an amazing accomplishment. Johnny Byrne, who I think is one of the great practitioners in our sound community, did the sound design for Point of Interest, and it's the story of a concentration camp commandant and his family who was taken up a home.
Isn't it The Zone of Interest?
I'm sorry, Zone of Interest. I'm sorry. Now,
Yeah. I
thank
haven't
you for
watched it yet.
correcting.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
And so you know the film on Zone of Interest.
Yeah.
And Johnny had to build the world outside of that home,
Wow.
which is the sounds of death and concentration camps and the horror of that without ever seeing it. There's a beautiful simplicity and genius in how he pulled that off.
Wow. Can't wait to watch it. Yeah. So, all right, sir, this is it. Mr. Mangini, thank you so much for your inspiring work. It's always been a target, a goal for me as a sound designer, and also, you've given life and badassery to some of my favorite films of all time. But most
That's a
importantly,
great word, badassery, by
Yeah.
the way. Thank you.
Yeah. So, but most importantly, I guess is your free spirit, generosity, and humanity, or that what's most important to me, and that we can all achieve if we try to, of course. And I'm not going to steal from your art, but without a doubt,
Go ahead.
I will steal from your kindness, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hamid Reza, right?
Yeah,
Hamid Reza.
yeah, perfect.
Okay. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you so much, sir.